My parents took my sister on vacation. I canceled the resort membership they couldn't afford. It started on a Monday. I was sitting in my office at the Ridgepoint Financial Group in Santa Barbara, sipping lukewarm coffee and checking quarterly statements before my 9 a.m. meeting. When a message popped up on my phone, my sister Courtney had posted new photos. Normally, I wouldn't stop to check social media during work, but something about the way the notification was worded made me pause. I opened the post and saw the three of them, Courtney, Mom, and Dad posing in matching linen outfits beside a private infinity pool with white sand stretching endlessly behind them. The caption read, "Paradise found. Just us three. Family first. Always." I didn't feel anything at first. Not anger, not sadness. Just a strange quiet in my chest that replaced the usual rhythm of thought. I stared at the screen for a while, rereading the line "just us three" until the words stopped making sense. It wasn't the kind of trip you forget to mention. This was not a weekend drive up the coast or a surprise dinner. From the resort tag, I recognized the name Soleil Private Club in the Maldives, one of our premium partners, usually booked months in advance. I was the one who handled the budget forecasts and corporate partnerships with high-end resorts like Soleil. I had even reviewed their Q4 renewal agreement just last week. I knew exactly how much it cost per night, and I knew exactly how exclusive it was. That's what made it worse. My name is Brittany Spears. I'm 37, head of strategic finance for Ridgepoint's hospitality division. And yes, before you ask, I've heard every version of the pop star joke. I don't live for attention. I live for clarity, for structure, for knowing exactly where things stand. I've spent the last 15 years building a reputation in an industry full of excess and illusion by being the one who sees through it. In my family, that role was both a blessing and a curse. Courtney, my younger sister, had always been the opposite free-spirited, impulsive, and beautiful in the kind of way that gets you invited into rooms before you've earned your seat. She bounced between wellness coaching, modeling contracts, and influencer sponsorships, never holding one job for long, but always surrounded by expensive things. Somehow, it worked for her. Somehow, she always landed on her feet. I used to assume our parents helped her out quietly. I never asked. I never wanted to be the older sister who policed how our parents spent their money. Until that morning, I didn't realize how much I had been edited out of the story they were telling online and in real life. I didn't call them immediately. I told myself maybe it was a last-minute celebration for Courtney's new sponsorship deal or something private that didn't require my involvement. But that night, after meetings and emails and a drive home in silence, I sat in my kitchen and stared at that photo again. Then I checked Mom's profile. More pictures, more captions, making lifelong memories with my favorite people. I checked Dad's. He never posted much, but even he had a blurry photo of Courtney and Mom holding coconut drinks, smiling into the horizon with a caption that read, "Grateful." Not once did they mention me. Not once did anyone seem to remember that their family of three was missing someone. I tried calling. It rang once, then voicemail. I tried again, same result. By midnight, I had sent a message. "Hey, just saw the photos. Hope everything's okay. Let me know when you have a moment." I didn't get a reply. I couldn't sleep that night. I wasn't hurt because they went on vacation without me. I was hurt because they didn't even bother to lie. There was no pretend emergency, no excuse about timing or logistics. They simply chose not to include me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't the first time. I had missed birthdays that got rescheduled last minute, dinners where they forgot to loop me in, group chats where I was mysteriously silent, not because I didn't reply, but because I had never been added. That night, something shifted. I opened my laptop and started looking into the Solea Resort's recent usage activity tied to our executive membership program. I knew that some of the benefits extended to select family members of Ridgepoint executives. I had quietly added my parents' names to that list 2 years ago, thinking it would be a nice gesture for their anniversary. What I found in that system changed everything. I still remember the first time I logged into the internal portal that managed our corporate luxury resort privileges. It was a rarely used benefit available only to senior financial officers at my level and above. And I had quietly added my parents' names 3 years ago as a small anniversary gift. Back then, I didn't think much of it. They rarely traveled far. And I figured it might be years before they used the access. But on that Tuesday night, as I sat at my dining table with their vacation photos still open on my phone, I typed their names into the system and waited. What came up changed everything I thought I understood about my family. The Maldives trip wasn't the first. Over the past 2.5 years, my parents had booked 8 luxury stays across the Solea Resort Network Bali, Santorini, Aspen during ski season, Lake Como in the spring. Not only had they used the benefits tied to my corporate status, they had fully unlocked every perk tied to those privileges: upgraded rooms, private chefs, priority spa reservations, airport transfers, and concierge access. But the part that made me go still wasn't the volume of trips. It was the guest information on each file. It was always 3 names: Mom, Dad, Courtney, never mine, not once. My name appeared only as the account holder, the gatekeeper, the resource, the one they didn't think necessary to invite. I sat frozen for a long time, not angry yet, not even surprised, just hollow. I scrolled back through every trip detail, room preferences, custom itineraries, even the same concierge's name showing up on multiple visits. They weren't rushing these trips. They were planned, intentional, spaced out enough to seem casual if someone asked, but close enough to feel like a pattern. And that's exactly what it was. A pattern of omission so quiet and smooth that I hadn't realized I'd been written out until I saw it documented in black and white on my own company's infrastructure. These weren't free vacations, even with elite discounts. Those multi-week stays for 3 people cost tens of thousands of dollars per year. While I was saving for a home and managing every line item of my personal budget, my family was quietly using benefits tied to my name to live out a fantasy life they couldn't afford on their own. And they had never once mentioned it, never thanked me, never said a word. I started digging further, tracing payments, deposits, and future bookings. That's when I found their upcoming Christmas reservation in Hawaii already confirmed, already billed. The credit card linked to that booking was the same one I had helped Dad qualify for back in 2019 during a brief financial rough patch when his credit had dropped below eligibility. I'd added my name as a joint user to raise the approval chances. I'd told myself it was temporary. I'd completely forgotten they never removed me. That card had been accumulating reward points and elite travel benefits for years. Those points were cashed in for upgraded rooms, flights, and concierge access across 3 continents. My parents hadn't just excluded me from the vacations. They had quietly turned me into the logistical backbone of a lifestyle they curated around my sister, then repackaged it all into a version of family that didn't include me. I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't draft a message. I didn't even cry. I just stared at the screen and realized that my silence over the years, my efforts to keep the peace and avoid conflict, had become the very thing that enabled this. I had convinced myself that being the responsible one meant I didn't need attention or inclusion, that being the practical daughter meant I didn't need gratitude or transparency. But in that moment, I saw clearly that I wasn't just overlooked. I was strategically omitted, and that wasn't something I could unsee. I no longer cared to know why they did it. I cared only about what I would do next. The following day, I submitted a formal request through our internal privileges system to revoke all external user access to my resort account. It was a clean process, just a few forms and verification steps. Once complete, it would immediately notify any associated users, my parents included, that their access had been suspended and all future bookings were under review. I also contacted the credit card company and requested a full separation of my name from any joint accounts and reward systems. The woman on the phone confirmed that my credit profile had played a major role in sustaining the card's premium status. Without me, the benefits would drop significantly. I didn't say a word to my family during those 5 days while the changes were processed. I went to work, answered emails, reviewed audits, and returned home to quiet evenings in my small apartment. But I knew something had shifted, something permanent. And when the first sign of panic came, an email from the Solea concierge informing my parents of the terminated membership and the cancellation of their Hawaii reservation, I felt, for the first time in years, that I wasn't just reacting, I was choosing. The first sign came 2 days after I submitted the request. An automated message from the resort concierge, addressed to my parents, had been forwarded to my work email by accident. It was short and polite, the kind of carefully worded disruption that luxury services tend to send when something far more inconvenient is about to unfold. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Spears, we regret to inform you that your membership status with Solea Privileges has been reevaluated due to recent account activity. As a result, your upcoming reservation at Solea Hawaii has been placed on hold pending verification. The tone was diplomatic. The implication was not. Their access was gone. Their vacation had just collapsed beneath them. And for the first time, they didn't have a script. I checked my phone. No calls, no messages, nothing from Courtney either. The silence said more than any apology would have. I imagined the three of them sitting at the dining table in our old family home, trying to piece together what had just happened, running through explanations that never included one simple fact, that I was the one holding the key all along, not out of pride, not out of revenge, just fact. They had used my name to build a fantasy, and I had finally withdrawn it. It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt quiet. That Friday, as I wrapped up a client call, my phone finally rang. It was Courtney. Her name flashing across the screen felt both familiar and foreign, like someone I used to know well, but hadn't spoken to in years. I answered without much expression in my voice. Hey, her voice cracked before the second word. Britt, do you know what's going on? The resort canceled our Hawaii trip. Dad's panicking, and Mom's trying to call customer service, but no one is telling us anything. I paused before answering, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to give her a moment to hear the silence on my end. Yes, I said finally, I know exactly what's going on. She waited, hoping I would explain further, but I didn't. Instead, I asked. How did you think all of that was getting paid for? She hesitated, then mumbled something about credit card points, family status, premium perks she assumed our parents had from their jobs. I let her talk herself in circles for nearly a minute before stopping her gently. They've been using my corporate membership and the credit privileges attached to my name. I found out last week. I canceled everything. The line went silent. I could hear her breathing, uneven and fast. Then came the disbelief. Wait, what? Why would they? How did they even? What do you mean they used your stuff? I explained how I had set up the membership years ago as a gesture, never realizing it would become a foundation for years of exclusive vacations that never once included me. I told her about the joint credit account, the luxury benefits they unlocked through my financial standing, and how I had quietly watched their curated world unfold without my name ever appearing in a single invitation. Courtney didn't say anything at first. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to something closer to guilt. I didn't know, I swear. I thought Mom and Dad were just figuring things out, being generous. I didn't respond, because the truth was, she didn't need to know. She had chosen not to ask. For years, she had lived a life where first-class upgrades, designer shopping, and exotic getaways just appeared when she needed them. And when someone lives in a world where things are always handed to them, they stop questioning who's paying for the tray they're being served on. I get it now, she said quietly. Why you're upset. I would be too. But I wasn't angry in that moment. Not at her. Not even at them. I was just done. Done being quiet. Done being erased. That weekend, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't answer my parents' missed calls or the series of half-hearted texts Mom sent pretending everything was fine. I stayed in my apartment, made a real dinner, sat with the silence, and let myself process what it meant to no longer be waiting for their approval. It's a strange kind of peace when you realize you've been holding on to a version of a family that doesn't actually exist anymore, or maybe never did. But knowing the truth, even when it hurts, gives you clarity. And clarity is a power they never expected me to use. On Sunday night, the silence finally broke. My father called just after 8, and for a moment, I debated whether to answer. I already knew what the call would be about, and part of me wanted to let it ring out and disappear into voicemail. But something about his name on the screen felt different this time. I answered with a quiet hello, not offering more than necessary. He cleared his throat before speaking, and his voice was tighter than I remembered. Brittany, I think we need to talk. There was no warmth in his tone, only the controlled restraint of someone who had just realized the walls were closing in. I said nothing. He took that as permission to continue. We got some emails from Solea, from the credit company. Apparently, there's been a change in the membership. Our trip is canceled. Did you do this? I waited before answering, not because I didn't have the words, but because I wanted to be sure I said them clearly. Yes, I did. He exhaled hard, like someone who had just taken a punch but didn't want to show it. But why? Brittany, why wouldn't you just tell us first? I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. You mean the way you told me about all those vacations, or the credit cards you opened under my name, or the trips you planned with Courtney, using benefits tied to my financial standing? He stayed quiet. I could feel him processing the reality of being seen clearly for the first time in years. No script, no excuse. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped an octave. We didn't mean to exclude you. It was never like that. You're always busy, always working. We didn't think you'd be interested. That was the line I had heard so many times before, like a polite apology wrapped in assumptions I never had the chance to correct. You didn't think I'd be interested in spending time with my family, in knowing how my name and resources were being used. He didn't answer. I kept going, my voice calm but deliberate. This isn't about one trip, Dad. This is about years of being treated like I'm outside the circle, while still being expected to fund what happens inside it. There was a long pause. Then a softer, more tired voice came through. I didn't realize how far it had gone. Your mother. She thought it would be fine, that it was all covered by the programs, the points. We didn't think it would affect you. It was a small sentence, but it revealed everything. They hadn't thought it would affect me because they hadn't thought about me at all. They had built a version of family that ran on my credit, my status, and my silence. And for a long time, I let them until I didn't. I'm not angry, I said finally, but I am done pretending I don't see it. I gave you access because I wanted to help. I never imagined I was giving you a tool to erase me from your lives while still benefiting from mine. He went quiet again, and in that stillness, something settled between us. The truth wasn't comfortable, but it was finally out in the open. What happens now, he asked, and for once, I didn't have to guess what he meant. Now, I said slowly, you rebuild with what you actually have, not with what you borrow from me. He didn't respond right away. I could hear faint noises in the background, maybe Mom pacing or Courtney asking questions from another room. We're in deeper than I thought, he said after a long silence. There are some things we probably should have told you a long time ago. I let that hang in the air, not pushing for answers, just letting the moment settle. He added, Emma doesn't know any of this. She thinks we're fine, that the perks just come with being a close family. She doesn't understand what she's been living on. For the first time, I heard something close to fear in his voice, the kind that creeps in when someone realizes the illusion they've been maintaining isn't just unsustainable, it's already collapsing. Then maybe it's time she learns. I said, because you're not just risking your future anymore, you're risking hers and mine. When we ended the call, I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like someone who had finally broken a silence that had been growing heavier with every year. The weight wasn't gone, but now at least it was being shared. And from that night on, I knew that nothing about our family dynamic would ever be able to return to the way it was. It was Tuesday afternoon when Courtney showed up at my apartment unannounced. I had just wrapped up a virtual review session with the finance team in Boston and was still holding my coffee mug when I heard the knock. I opened the door, and there she was, sunglasses on, hair slightly undone, holding a tote bag that didn't match the rest of her outfit. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well, which for Courtney was rare. I stepped aside and she walked in slowly, not saying much at first. She scanned the room as if she were trying to understand the space I had built for myself. I didn't know you lived this simply, she said, almost like it was a compliment. I raised an eyebrow, not responding. She sat down at the small kitchen table and finally said what she came to say. Dad told me everything. I didn't ask what that meant because I had a feeling he didn't actually tell her everything, just enough to explain why their dream vacation had vanished and why the cards they depended on were suddenly under review. She looked at me differently this time, not with pity or the usual assumption that I'd always be the backup plan. She looked like someone who was beginning to see past the glitter. You've been carrying more than I realized, she said. And this time, I believe she meant it. I sat across from her and waited. She kept talking. All those trips, all the gifts. I thought it was just how they showed love. I thought they did it for both of us. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it, like she had aged 5 years since the last phone call. But now I see. It wasn't love. It was performance. They were showing off a version of family that didn't exist. I nodded slowly. It was the first time she'd said anything that didn't deflect responsibility. She wasn't playing the favorite. She was waking up from it. I told her about the credit account, the reward system, the loyalty tier that was only possible because of my financial footprint. I explained how their status at the resorts wasn't magic or inheritance. It was math. It was based on my history, my debt-to-income ratio, my consistency. And she listened without interrupting. For once. She didn't try to minimize or explain it away. She just sat there. The same way I had sat in silence years ago when I first realized I would always be the invisible one at family dinners unless someone needed a favor. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. Do you think they excluded you because they were ashamed? That maybe they knew they couldn't explain it if you were there? I didn't answer right away. The question lingered in the space between us. It wasn't about shame. It was about control. If I had been on those trips, I would have asked the kinds of questions that ruin illusions. I would have seen the cracks in the story. And once you see the cracks, you either fix the foundation or admit the whole thing was a facade. They weren't ready for either, so they kept me away. Courtney leaned forward and put her hands on the table. Her nails were bare. She almost never came over without them being done. I want to help fix this, she said. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm done pretending I don't see it. And for the first time, I believed her. I believed she wasn't just trying to calm the waves to get back on the cruise. She was standing in the storm, eyes open, figuring out what it meant to be responsible for your own ship. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't offer solutions. I just stood up and poured her a glass of water. We sat there like that for a while, not talking, not pretending, just two sisters finally sitting at the same table without the choreography. That night, as she left, she paused in the doorway. I don't think they're bad people, she said. I think they just got addicted to the version of life that looked good online. And I let them. She didn't ask me to fix it. She didn't ask me to talk to them. She didn't ask for a second chance. She just walked out into the hallway and let the door close softly behind her. And in that silence, I realized something important. This wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about reclaiming the narrative before the lies wrote me out completely. The following weekend, I drove up to Paso Robles to visit someone I hadn't seen in months. My grandmother, Elaine, lived alone in a modest one-story home she had owned since the 70s. It was quiet, well-kept, and smelled faintly of dried lavender and old oak. She answered the door slowly, adjusting her cardigan, and greeted me with a look that held more awareness than I expected. "You've got something on your chest," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I smiled lightly but didn't deny it. She had always known when something wasn't right, not because she pried, but because she listened better than anyone else ever did. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table I used to color at when I was 5, and I began telling her the story from the beginning. I didn't dramatize it or add emotion. I laid it out like a clean balance sheet. One transaction after another, one omission after the next. I told her about the resort perks, the canceled trip, the phone call with Dad, and the conversation with Courtney. I told her what I had found in the credit reports, the silent accumulation of debt beneath the image of success. She didn't flinch once. When I finished, she folded her hands and rested them on the table. Her eyes locked on mine with the quiet steadiness of someone who had seen enough in life to understand that pain doesn't always come with raised voices. "I've suspected something for a long time," she said. "Not the details, but the shape of it. The way your mother spoke about you shifted years ago, less about who you are, more about what you could do for them." That sentence struck deeper than I wanted to admit. Grandma had always been neutral in the way older generations sometimes are, trying to keep the family intact by staying out of the middle, but even neutrality has limits. She told me she had noticed the imbalance years ago, that when I graduated college. The celebration was modest and short, while Courtney's art school showcase got a catered event and a rented loft. That when I bought my first car on my own, no one asked to see it. But when Courtney leased a convertible she couldn't afford, they posed for pictures like she had won the lottery. "I don't think they meant harm," she said gently, "but they built a story around Courtney being fragile and you being fine. And over time, they started acting like the story was real." I looked down at my hands, suddenly remembering every moment I had been expected to understand their silence as grace, to accept their favoritism as unintentional. "I think they thought you didn't need them," she added. But what they didn't realize was that no matter how strong you are, no one wants to be left out of their own family. Her words didn't come with advice or solutions. She didn't tell me to forgive them or let it go. She didn't try to reinterpret the damage into some noble sacrifice. She just acknowledged what had been lost. And in doing so, she gave me space to see it too. Later that afternoon, we walked through her backyard garden, a quiet patch of rosemary and succulents she had tended for over 20 years. As we stood by the old peach tree, she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes love doesn't look like what you hoped. Sometimes it forgets you, even when you've done everything right. But that doesn't mean you disappear. It just means you stop waiting for their story to include you and start writing your own." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just nodded, holding that sentence the way you hold something fragile but true. Driving home that evening, the sky turning orange behind the hills, I felt lighter not because anything had been fixed, but because someone had finally seen me clearly. I no longer needed to prove I was hurt. I no longer needed to explain why their actions mattered. I had done what I needed to do, not to punish, but to protect. And that distinction changed everything. 3 weeks later, I received a dinner invitation from my parents. It arrived not as a text, but as a handwritten card slipped into my apartment mailbox. That alone told me they were trying to frame it as something sincere, something more thoughtful than a last-minute call or a forced group chat. The handwriting was Mom's. It hadn't changed in years, neat and overly rounded like someone still trying to be the picture of grace. The message inside was brief. "We'd like to have dinner with you, just you. No expectations. Please say yes." I sat with that card on the kitchen counter for an entire day before deciding what to do. Every part of me was bracing for manipulation, but another part was curious, if only to see what kind of people they thought they were now, after everything had cracked open. I arrived at their house around 6. The lights were already on and the car was out of the driveway, probably moved to make room for mine. That alone told me they had rehearsed this evening like a performance. When I stepped through the door, the first thing I noticed was the absence of Courtney. It really was just them. No distractions, no buffers. My mother greeted me with a kind of hesitant relief, the way someone might greet a stranger who used to be family. She led me into the dining room where the table was set simply. No candles, no centerpieces, No excessive wine glasses, just dinner. We made small talk at first, mostly about work and the weather and some new boutique hotel opening in Santa Barbara. It was awkward, polite, like people avoiding a wound, but eventually, my father cleared his throat and placed his fork down. "We owe you an apology," he said, voice lower than usual, and not just for what happened with the membership, for a lot of things we never said out loud. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to hear what they thought counted as everything. My mother looked at me carefully, then continued where he left off. "We used your success like a safety net, and we dressed it up like pride. We told people how proud we were of you, while quietly depending on what you provided. And that's not love, that's convenience." I had expected excuses. I had expected denial. What I didn't expect was clarity. She kept going. "We thought you didn't mind, because you never made demands. You never asked for attention, and over time, we built a world where it was easier to give Courtney what she asked for than to notice what you didn't." I looked at them both, unsure whether I was hearing sincerity or performance. But it didn't matter, because for the first time in years, I wasn't asking for anything. I was just listening. My father added, "It's hard to admit that the daughter we ignored is the one who held everything together. But we see it now, and we're sorry." I didn't cry. I didn't offer absolution. I simply asked, "What happens now?" The question wasn't a test. It was a boundary. My mother responded, "Now, we rebuild honestly. No more pretending. No more perks we can't afford. And no more stories that erase you." It sounded rehearsed, maybe even idealistic. But the part that mattered was this. They weren't asking me to fix it. They were finally holding the damage in their own hands. As we cleared the dishes, my dad paused at the kitchen counter and looked over. "We're selling the lake house," he said. "It was bought on credit we didn't really have. It's time we stopped pretending that keeping up appearances is worth losing people over." I nodded, not because I agreed with every detail, but because I understood what it meant to say that out loud. Letting go of symbols is harder than letting go of people sometimes, but they were finally beginning to understand which one mattered more. I left that night not with closure, but with something better, an understanding that I could let go without having to disappear. That being done with a pattern didn't mean being done with myself. As I drove home, the roads were quiet and the air felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't replaying old conversations in my head. I wasn't trying to rewrite history or find the right words to justify my silence. I was simply moving forward. And that was enough. A few days after that dinner, I returned to my usual rhythm: client meetings, campaign planning, check-ins with vendors, and the quiet comfort of a life I had built on structure and discipline. The chaos of my family's unraveling had settled just enough to breathe again. I wasn't looking for change anymore. I wasn't hoping for grand gestures or emotional breakthroughs. I was simply focused on maintaining peace in the space I controlled. That's why it surprised me when Courtney texted to ask if she could bring someone to see me at the office. Just 10 minutes. She wrote, "I promise you'll want to hear this." I hesitated but agreed, partly out of curiosity, partly because something about the tone felt different. Not apologetic, not defensive, just neutral. Maybe that was progress. They showed up at 3 o'clock sharp. Courtney was dressed in a muted navy blazer and flats, her hair pulled back into a low ponytail, a version of her I hadn't seen since high school graduation. Next to her stood a young woman I didn't recognize at first. She introduced herself as Lila, a friend from college, now working at a women's finance education nonprofit. Courtney said you might be open to hearing about a collaboration. She said calmly. I nodded, gesturing for them to sit. As they talked, I realized what this really was. Courtney wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was showing me something different. She was trying to build something that didn't need to be funded by deception or debt. Lila explained the initiative. They were running workshops for young women navigating family financial manipulation, early credit entrapment, and debt shaming. It wasn't flashy, but it was honest. Courtney wanted to partner using a mini docuseries concept I had produced for another client. You helped shape that campaign for the ethics board, right? She asked. The one about transparency and consumer trust. I nodded, surprised that she'd paid enough attention to remember. We're not asking for your money, she added quickly. Just your brain, your lens. We want to tell stories that actually mean something. I leaned back in my chair, quiet for a moment, trying to understand what was happening. This wasn't Courtney trying to redeem herself by copying me. It was Courtney trying, for the first time, to operate from a place that didn't revolve around being the center. She wasn't leading the project. She wasn't pitching herself. She was part of something that wasn't about her. That was new. I asked questions, real ones, about content structure, timeline, storytelling arcs, and audience behavior. I didn't let sentiment guide the conversation. I kept it rooted in creative integrity, and they answered thoughtfully. They weren't asking for shortcuts. They were asking for strategy. When the meeting ended, Courtney lingered for a second and said something that stopped me. This isn't me trying to fix everything. I know that's not how this works. But if I can build something better from what we broke, maybe that's worth something. I didn't offer reassurance. I simply said, then build it right. No shortcuts, no illusions. She nodded, not expecting approval, only accountability. After they left, I sat in my office and stared at the dry erase board filled with campaign segments. All of it, every job. Every project had come from years of staying quiet, pushing forward, and earning results without asking for applause. And now, for the first time, someone from the other side of that silence was showing up to help write something different, not perfect, but honest. I didn't commit to the partnership that day. I told them I needed time to think, not because I doubted the project, but because I needed to make sure I wasn't slipping into old roles: fixer, funder, silent supporter. I needed to contribute as a peer, not a crutch, and that distinction would shape everything going forward. That evening, I went for a walk down to the pier. The wind was sharp, and the sky was beginning to bruise with that late California dusk. I watched a group of teenagers filming something on their phones, probably another viral skit or choreographed challenge. I stood there for a while, remembering the version of myself that once thought visibility was earned only by being useful. Now I knew better. Visibility didn't come from being needed. It came from being seen. And finally, I was being seen for something other than what I could provide. A month passed. The resort membership had been fully canceled. The automatic payments stopped draining from my account, and the official termination notice arrived with a quiet thud in my inbox. No drama, no apology attached, just a single PDF marked confirmed. In a way. That quiet ending suited the story. There was no ceremony to it, no confrontation, just an unraveling that had finally reached the point of completion. But what lingered wasn't the money. It was the understanding that I had allowed something to grow for too long without calling it what it was. I hadn't protected my boundaries. I had let guilt disguise itself as loyalty. And for years, I mistook silence for strength, That was the part that stayed with me more than any canceled luxury. Professionally, things were shifting. A brand I had quietly mentored through a rough launch just landed its first national ad buy. A sustainability platform I'd helped reposition now had the kind of audience growth others only chase through empty virality. People were noticing not just the numbers, but the tone. They were starting to see that trust wasn't just a buzzword in my work. It was the thread behind every decision I made. And maybe that was what changed everything. When your personal life crumbles quietly in the background, your professional instincts either become sharper or collapse under the weight. Mine sharpened, not out of vengeance, out of clarity. I still hadn't decided whether to take on Courtney's documentary project. There was something tempting about using my skill set for something deeply personal, something rooted in the very dysfunction I'd survived. But there was also the risk of reopening wounds that hadn't fully scarred. So instead of making a decision, I did what I always do when clarity feels out of reach. I left town. I took a 3-day solo trip to Monterey. No email, no laptop, just a battered notebook, an old camera, and a list of coffee shops I'd always meant to visit. I stayed in a quiet Airbnb owned by a retired professor who left a handwritten welcome note on the counter and stocked the fridge with cream and blueberries. I walked by the sea every morning. I watched strangers talk like they'd never known betrayal. I let the salt air settle into my skin. On the second evening, sitting outside a small cafe with a ceramic mug of coffee warming my hands, I began writing something that wasn't a strategy outline or a pitch. It was a letter, not one I planned to send, just one I needed to write. In it, I told my younger self I was sorry for how long I let others narrate her worth. I told her she didn't owe anyone comfort at the cost of her voice. I told her she was right to walk away, even when no one clapped. And when I finished, I folded the page and tucked it into the back of my notebook. That moment wasn't dramatic. It didn't end in tears. It ended in stillness. When I returned to the city, everything looked exactly the same, but something inside me had shifted. I emailed Courtney and told her I'd take the meeting with the nonprofit board to explore the collaboration under one condition. I'd serve as a story consultant, not a producer, not a fixer, and definitely not the one cleaning up anything behind the scenes. She agreed without hesitation. That told me what I needed to know. She had changed enough to not ask me to play the role I used to fill. That was more than progress. That was proof. That week, my parents mailed me a check not to repay everything, just a gesture. It was small, but it was theirs. No one asked for applause. No one tried to reframe history, and I didn't cash it. I pinned it to my corkboard as a reminder that sometimes a small step backward is the only honest way forward. A few weeks ago, I walked past the resort for the first time in nearly a year. Not by plan. I had a lunch meeting at a nearby hotel, and as I stepped out into the street, the sight of the tall gates and that familiar limestone arch caught me off guard. I paused across the road, watching golf carts glide by and valet attendants moving with robotic ease. It all looked the same, sleek, curated, painfully exclusive. But something in me had changed. There was no bitterness, no regret, just a quiet recognition that I no longer belonged in a space where I had once sacrificed so much just to keep others comfortable. That feeling the absence of longing was the clearest sign of growth I had felt in a long time. Later that evening, I got home to find a voice message from my mom. She had a new tone lately, softer, less urgent, like someone trying not to step on eggshells but also not quite ready to own the damage. She told me they were planning a small dinner for my dad's birthday and that I was welcome to come if I wanted, not expected, not guilted, just invited. It was the first time in years the words felt like an offering rather than a trap. I sat with that message for a while before deciding to go, not to mend anything or prove a point, just to show myself I could stand in that house again without folding. That night, the dinner was quiet. My sister Courtney showed up late, alone, dressed in something understated for once. She didn't dominate the room. She didn't talk over anyone. She just sat beside me and passed the bread without comment. At one point, while Dad was telling an old story, she leaned in and whispered, "I saw the numbers from your campaign launch last week. You really built something." Huh. There was no sarcasm in her voice, no challenge, just the kind of acknowledgement that used to be too expensive for her to give. I nodded. Yeah, took a while. That was it. And somehow, it felt like a deeper apology than any speech could deliver. After dessert, I stood up to help clear the table. My mother joined me in the kitchen. We worked side by side in silence, like two people who had once known how to love each other but forgot the language. She dried the plates without looking at me and said, almost too casually, "I didn't know how to stop depending on you. You made it so easy." I didn't answer. I just handed her another dish. Some truths don't need commentary. They only need to be said out loud once. When I got back to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not because anything was fixed. Nothing dramatic had happened. No apologies were shouted. No hugs exchanged. But I had walked into a room where I had once been invisible and remained completely intact. That mattered. That counted. And maybe that was all I ever really needed. Now, when people ask me what finally made me draw the line, I tell them this: it wasn't a single moment. It was years of being useful instead of loved. Being the one who never asked for anything but was expected to give everything. It was realizing that peace isn't about making others comfortable. It's about living a life where your presence isn't taken for granted. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped building them alone. Sometimes I think about how easy it would have been to keep the membership going, to keep covering gaps in silence, to keep pretending things were fine because it was easier than confronting the truth. But then I remember how small I used to feel, even as I carried everyone on my back. And I know that no comfort, no access, no curated family image is worth the slow erasure of your own voice. I built my life again, not out of spite, but out of truth. I no longer work to prove myself. I work to build things that outlive temporary praise. My success is quieter now, but it's mine, completely mine. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a slow, steady return to yourself. So the question is, what part of your life are you still paying for? Just to keep the peace,